The history of occupational therapy groups in South Africa. Hi, I'm Louise Fouché and welcome to OTGrow's YouTube channel. And here we talk about tips, tools, and techniques. And today we're going to talk about some interesting facts. And the idea at the end of the day is to become an effective group facilitator. So OTASA, South African, is the Occupational Therapy Association of South Africa, is turning 80 years old this year. And so I was asked to write an article around the history of occupational therapy groups in South Africa. And as I was writing the article, I realized a lot of it is my memory, but it doesn't mean it's our collective memory. And so OTGrow decided we're going to be hosting panel discussion conversations around the collective history of South Africa. The groups are occupational therapy groups. And so we invited panelists on the 19th of September, and we've got one again on the 17th of October. Different panelists, different backgrounds, academics, practitioners that have retired already, but also practitioners that are running their practices at the currently, and kind of having a look at what is the collective memory of occupational therapy groups in South Africa. Because also it's important to know where we come from so we can intentionally decide where are we going. And sometimes things happen and we kind of in the flow, we pick things up, we let things go. And it's not intentionally, and it's good every now and then to stop and say, okay, but where are we going? And to determine our own path and not paths that are set for us by medical aids and by other members of the MDT team. And so I thought you might find it interesting, as I did, learning about our collective history in terms of occupational therapy groups in South Africa. So I thought I'd share some of the pointers that came up while we were listening to our panelists. All right, so one of the interesting facts is that Rosemary Crouch, which we all know, who is world renowned, she trained in the 1950s to become an occupational therapist. And she said at that time there was no module for group work. They weren't trained in group work. That was such an aha moment for me because we always kind of learn about these veterans that came back, and my concept was always kind of people were doing occupational therapy in groups. So when I realized there wasn't initially in the 1950s any module on group work, I was flabbergasted, which means that our group works journey is still a very new one in South Africa, spanning most probably only from the 1960s to where we are today. So no more than 65 years. The other thing that was interesting is that Rosemary Crouch then started to put some group modules together. It was her passion, a passion of hers, and that was before she started having children. And a lot of what she was doing in clinical practice was around group work. It was also within the mental health field. And so she did her master's, her honors, and her master's. One was on artwork and discussions around it, which I suppose now we would call projective techniques, and then having discussions and looking at it. But they called it art therapy and discussion groups. And then her master's degree she did on psychodrama. So from the core, from the inception of group work, it's not an add-on that occupational therapists later got because they wanted it. It has been in our foundation of our group work. Things like psychodrama and projective techniques has always been there. The other thing that was interesting is the training with regards to group dynamics. It has always been part of our group work curriculum. And it's interesting because I'm not sure that that is being trained. Students are not being trained that anymore on an undergrad level. I am not 100% sure about that. So if you are in academics and you are training the students in group dynamics, please let me know. Just from what I've seen in training of OTGrow and in the groups that we do and the training in that often that is an element that seems to surprise the young therapists that attend. The other thing that was interesting is Pat DeWitt was saying that there was already in the 1970s pushback from the psychologist feeling that we are impeding on their scope of practice, which I found very interesting because I'm sure there's a lot of young therapists at the moment, especially when they move in and start a new program, there's pushback from psychologists. So I want to say that's part of our narrative at the moment. It has been again from the 1970s. It is more than 50 years that we are walking with this narrative of psychologists feeling we are impeding on their ground, and yet we have continued to do as we do. I think here what's important for us to realize is just our scope of practice. There might be some OTs that are moving over into the psychology scope of practice. But as occupational therapists, if we are very clear on our scope of practice, that we continue what we do and the way we facilitate in our groups. So that was also a bit of a giggle to understand that that is something that's come as far back as we can remember, and that it's not a reason at this stage, after more than 55 years of our narrative, to just, I almost want to say, capitulate and adhere to a box that is, how can I put this sensitively? In other words, to be determined by medical aides or other members of the multidisciplinary team what our scope is. All right, the other thing that was interesting is there was a very wide range of activities and types of groups that was facilitated by occupational therapists already in the 1990s. So as group work was developing and more elements was incorporated, there was a really wide variety. But what's fascinating is that none of the groups included psychoeducation. Psychoeducational groups, I think, only came into play when there was more of the private hospitals and clinics that came about. And that the psychoeducation was therapists that did life skills training and turned it into psycho-educational groups. So it's very interesting to note, up until the mid-1990s, there was minimal psychoeducation groups, something that I think has dragged us down and changed our scope in terms of groups. And that's something maybe you don't agree with me. Maybe you want to pop in the comment if you don't agree with that statement. But it is something that wasn't part of our collective history until almost the turn of the century. So what were the groups that OTs did in the 1980s and 1990s? And there's a whole lot of them. I'm going to read some of them. It was art therapy for stress and anxiety, conflict management, relaxation therapy, role play was done, psychodrama was done, movement therapy, arts and crafts, vocational rehabilitation, sports group, leisure groups, cognitive stimulation groups, ADL groups like cooking groups, for instance, and so the list goes on. And so the activities was so core to what was done. Now, some of them you might be doing in your program. Some of them you might still have some remnants of that. But it's just interesting to see what have you let go of in the program that you are facilitating. Also, from the therapists that came on, we've heard that there is incorporation of things like mindfulness, of DBT, of CBT, of tension release, lot of the kind of, I almost want to say, other, what would we call it, techniques, other approaches that are slowly starting to take the place of some of these activity groups. And again, what's important is for us to say, do we agree with this or not? What is also becoming quite evident from the panel discussion we had is that some of what is happening is that because it's psychoeducation or it's from other modalities, it's now kind of anybody can do DBT, anybody can do mindfulness, anybody can do, and we're losing our specific scope of practice and our unique contributions in terms of activities, tasks, and occupation that is so core to our scope. And so I think I want to leave you not only understanding that where we are coming from and how deep some of the groups have been in our history, but it's to understand in what do we want to take forward. And I think what I would like to leave you with is the concept of How are we being shaped by outside pressures like medical aids and other multidisciplinary team members instead of really coming home to what makes occupational therapy unique? What is the value that we can add to our clients in groups that no other discipline can add? What is that unique offering that we give? And maybe to leave it at that. So I hope that you have found this episode exciting and thought-provoking, and to again maybe just sit back and think, what am I doing? How does it compare? What has happened? And where do I think occupational therapy should be going? Again, that's something you can pop in the comments below. Where do you think we should be going? Should we be going into kind of more general things that we can just offer a wide range of things? Or do we keep to our scope of activities and really tasks and occupation that makes us unique? All right. And if you found this valuable, please subscribe and press the notification button. And in the meantime, maybe give these things some thought, and happy facilitating.